My wife looked me directly in the eye while we sat at our own dinner table surrounded by our children and said I wasn't worth the investment anymore. She said it like she was commenting on the weather. Calm, almost bored, like she'd rehearsed it 100 times, alone in the car. What she didn't understand was that for 11 weeks, she'd been hiding medical test results that could have told me whether I had months left or decades. What she really didn't understand was that my doctor was about to call my phone at that exact table, in front of everyone sitting there, and destroy every lie she'd carefully built her escape plan around. I'm Thomas Hendricks. Most people call me Tom. I'm 66 years old. I spent 30 years as a production engineer at manufacturing firms across Illinois, and 7 years ago, I bought out my partner and turned Hendricks Industrial Solutions on the south side of Chicago into something that actually carried my name, something I could be proud of. I always believed that if you worked hard, paid attention, told people the truth even when it cost you, and took care of the people you loved, they'd show up for you when everything was falling apart. I was wrong about the last part. Not the work, not the attention, not the truth, but the people part. That's where I was completely wrong. There's a moment I think about almost every day now, sometimes multiple times a day. I'll be sitting on my back porch in Bridgeport, coffee getting cold in my hands, and that moment comes back so clear it's like it's happening right now. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I married Patricia Hendricks, maiden name Salvatore, 38 years ago at Street Jerome's in Pilsen. She was 23, working at a dental office on Milwaukee Avenue. She was beautiful in the way that made you feel like you were the lucky one just by being in the same room. I was 28, with calluses on my hands from years in my father's workshop, learning how machines actually worked. We built a life slowly, the way you have to if you want it to actually last. A 3-bedroom house in Bridgeport that we paid off in 18 years instead of 30. We bought used cars and drove them until the transmission literally gave up. 2 kids. Our son Marcus, he's 34. He came in and out of the shop starting when he was 22. He was supposed to help with operations. Instead, he mostly talked on the phone and took long lunches with his wife, Stephanie. Our daughter, Nicole, she's 31. She moved to Minneapolis for a corporate job in strategy 8 years ago. Every single Sunday at 6 o'clock, no matter what, my phone rings. Even when it's raining. Even when she's exhausted. She calls. That detail matters. Really matters. Hold on to it. I want to be clear about something because I've thought about this constantly over the past year and a half. Patricia and I had a good marriage for most of those 38 years. Not perfect. Nobody has that. But I never once, not a single time, doubted that if something happened to me, if something real and devastating came, she'd be the first person fighting to keep me alive. That's what I thought walking into March of last year. That belief cost me 11 weeks. 11 weeks I can never get back. It started with a cough, not dramatic. Just a dry, stubborn thing that showed up in early March and refused to leave. The kind you blame on Chicago wind and the salt they throw on the streets. The kind you ignore because you're 65 and you've got a business to run and employees depending on you for their paycheck every other Friday. By April, I'd lost 12 pounds without trying. My shirt started hanging different on my shoulders. Looser. I'd catch myself in the bathroom mirror and notice my face had changed somehow, hollowed out in a way that didn't make sense. My plant manager, a man named Robert Castellano who'd worked beside me for 23 years, he was the one who finally said something. We were standing over a CNC machine on a Tuesday morning in late April. He just looked at me and said, "Tom, you look like hell." Like seriously. When's the last time you saw a doctor who wasn't for your back? I went in on April 20th. My primary care physician, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, ordered a chest x-ray almost like a formality, something to rule out nothing and move on. Except it wasn't a formality. There was a mass in my lower right lung, 3.5 centimeters. She didn't say the word cancer not yet, but I could see it in her eyes. She referred me immediately to a pulmonologist at Northwestern Memorial who did a bronchoscopy and biopsy on May 3rd. I remember the date because my daughter called that same week to tell me she'd gotten promoted. I didn't tell her anything about what was happening. I told myself I was protecting her from unnecessary stress. I told Patricia everything though, every detail. The doctor's name, Dr. Elena Vasquez. The pathology specialist they'd recommended at Northwestern's Cancer Center, Dr. James Okonkwo. When I told her, we were standing in the kitchen. She was making coffee. I remember the kitchen was bright that morning. The light was coming through the window in that specific way it does in May. I told her everything, and she did everything a wife is supposed to do. She took my hand. She said we'd get through this together, whatever it was. She even squeezed my hand 3 times like it was a code. I remember thinking, this is what marriage is. This is what it means to share something terrifying with someone. I want you to remember that squeeze because I've thought about it thousands of times since, and every time I think about it differently. The biopsy results were supposed to come back within 7 to 10 business days. Dr. Okonkwo's office had my cell phone number, my work email, my home number, everything. 11 days went by. 12. 15. I never got a call. I assumed reasonably. I thought that no news traveling slow through a big hospital system probably meant they were overwhelmed, that there was a backlog. Around day 14, I called the office myself. A scheduling coordinator named Linda told me something that made me stand still in my own driveway, holding the phone like it might burn me. She said my results had been received and reviewed, and someone from Dr. Okonkwo's office had already spoken with a family contact about next steps. A family contact. Not me, not the patient. A family contact. I was standing there in the driveway, and I felt something cold move down my spine, like someone had poured ice water down my shirt. I didn't tell Patricia that night. I told myself there was probably an explanation. Maybe the office had reached my sister by mistake. Maybe there was a clerical error with another Hendrix in the Chicago medical system. I want you to understand. I wasn't looking for proof of betrayal. I was a 66-year-old man who still believed, foolishly believed, that the woman I'd promised to spend my life with wasn't capable of doing the thing I was about to discover. Over the next 3 weeks, small things started collecting. Things I noticed but didn't know how to interpret. Patricia started taking phone calls in the garage with the door shut. In 38 years, she'd never done that. She bought a new car, a white Tesla Model S, paid mostly in cash. Just like that. She joined a gym on Harlem Avenue 4 mornings a week, and when she came home, she smelled like a men's cologne I didn't recognize. Not bad, just wrong, different, like the smell of another man's choices. I need to be honest about my own blindness here. I noticed all of these things, every single one, and I still didn't connect them. Not because I'm stupid, but because the alternative was too big to hold in my head. It's easier to explain a cough as stress than to explain the person you love building a completely separate life that doesn't include you. I didn't know it yet, but the woman who'd promised to stand beside me had already made a decision about which fight was worth fighting. Here's what changed everything. Robert Castellano, my plant manager, found me in the same spot 3 weeks after our first conversation about my health. He was wiping his hands on a shop rag. He wasn't looking directly at me the way men do when they're about to say something that's going to break something. He said, "Tom, I need to tell you something. Last Tuesday, Stephanie came in to pick up Marcus's check. She was talking to Jennifer in the front office about houses. Big ones, up in Evanston, $500,000 places." And I'm quoting exactly what Robert said he heard. "Once everything settles with Tom, we're going to have plenty." I stood there holding a part that didn't mean anything anymore. Once everything settles with Tom, I hadn't told a single person at the shop I was sick. Not Robert, not Marcus, nobody. So someone in my family had been talking, and it wasn't me. That night I called Nicole, not to tell her everything, just to hear a voice I actually trusted. She picked up on the second ring like she always does. And she said, "Dad, it's Tuesday. You never call on Tuesday. What's wrong?" I told her about the cough, the biopsy, the missing phone call from Dr. Okonkwo's office. I told her what Robert had overheard about the house in Evanston. I told her everything, except the thing I was most afraid of. There was a long silence, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Nicole said something I've repeated to myself every single day since. She said, "Dad, you told Mom about a biopsy 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks. And nobody called you back. In what universe is that normal? Why does everyone in your entire family except you seem to know what's actually happening?" She told me to get on a plane. She said she'd already booked me an appointment with an oncologist at the University of Minnesota Medical Center for that Friday. She said she couldn't afford to take time off work, but she was taking it anyway. She said, "Dad, when you come, don't tell Mom you're coming. I know that sounds extreme. I know it probably seems like you're being paranoid. But Dad, that's not normal. None of this is normal." I flew to Minneapolis the next day. I told Patricia I had a supplier meeting in Chicago, which was a lie. The first real lie I'd told her in 38 years. Nicole picked me up at the airport herself. "I want you to know something about my daughter that matters for everything that comes next." She'd cleared her entire calendar. She'd taken 2 days off work at a company where she was still proving herself, where she couldn't really afford to lose those hours. When we got to the cancer clinic, she didn't let go of my hand. When we sat in the waiting room, she held it the exact same way Patricia used to hold it, except Nicole's hand wasn't hiding anything. Nicole's hand was just there, present. The oncologist at University of Minnesota, Dr. Marcus Whitfield, reviewed all my imaging and requested my original pathology from Northwestern. That request is what cracked everything open, because getting those records released meant a phone call directly back to Dr. Okonkwo's office. And this time, it was me on the phone. Not a mystery caller, not a family contact. Me. The woman who answered was Linda, the same scheduling coordinator I'd spoken to before. She said, "Oh, Mr. Hendricks, I'm so glad you're calling. Dr. Okonkwo has been trying to reach you for weeks. We were told by your wife that you decided to pursue a different course of care entirely, that you didn't want to be contacted about treatment scheduling. Is that not accurate?" I stood in a hospital hallway in Minneapolis, 150 miles from home, and I felt something happen in my chest that wasn't the tumor. It was everything I believed about Patricia, about marriage, about loyalty, folding in on itself in real time. She had impersonated me, to a hospital, about cancer treatment. She had prevented a doctor from calling me. She had made a medical decision on my behalf, pretending to be me, and she'd done it to buy time to build a second life. That's not love. That's not even ordinary betrayal. That's something else. That's something calculated. I flew home 3 days later with a folder of paperwork and a diagnosis that I want you to hear this clearly. The doctor told me, in words I'll never forget, "Mr. Hendricks, if we start treatment within the next 4 weeks, your 5-year survival odds are excellent. This is not a death sentence. This is a fight we win most of the time." 11 weeks. 11 weeks that Patricia had let bleed away, while I sat at home wondering why a doctor wouldn't call me back. I didn't confront her the moment I walked through the door. I need to explain why. Because I've had a lot of time to think about this. I'm an engineer. End of life. I spent 30 years designing systems that had to hold weight before they were ever tested. You don't build something to failure. You plan where the load is going to fall first. I needed to understand exactly what Patricia had done before I said a single word to her, before I gave her the chance to explain it away or minimize it or pretend it was something smaller than what it was. The first call I made the next morning was to an attorney named David Berkowitz, whose office is above a deli on Damon Avenue. I'd used David twice before for business contracts. He's the kind of guy who doesn't bill you for thinking time, which means he's trustworthy. I sat down across from his desk and said, "David, I need you to find out exactly what my wife has been doing with our money. And I need you to assume the answer is going to break my heart." David pulled out a legal pad and said, "Then let's find out together." The second call was to a forensic accountant David recommended, a woman named Keisha Williams, who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet unraveling, not divorce lawyers yet, not accusations, just receipts, just evidence. Keisha spent 10 days going through our joint accounts, the business accounts at Hendricks Industrial Solutions, and a separate credit union account. Patricia had quietly opened under her maiden name, with a small initial deposit back in February. February. The same month my cough started. What Keisha found filled 2 file folders. I remember driving back to my office after meeting with her, both hands shaking on the steering wheel. Patricia had withdrawn exactly $238,000 from our joint retirement account over 4 months. She'd structured the withdrawals in amounts just under the reporting threshold so it wouldn't trigger an automatic flag with our financial advisor. Most of it, about $105,000, had gone into that new account under Salvatore, her maiden name. From there, around $91,000 had gone toward the down payment on a house in Evanston, listed solely under her O. whose seeing was scheduled for the week after our anniversary. The Tesla had been paid for in full, $76,000 straight out of that same account. And then there was the man. His name was Adrian Torres. He was 43 years old. He was a personal trainer and part owner of the gym on Harlem Avenue where Patricia went 4 mornings a week. Keisha had pulled together hotel charges at places near the airport, restaurant receipts from places I'd never been, a joint gym membership under both their names that Patricia had opened in Adrian's last name. Dates on credit card statements showed purchases at men's clothing stores, jewelry stores, restaurants where 2 people would sit across from each other. The earliest charges Keisha could trace went back to late November of the previous year. So Patricia had been building this second life for about 6 months. 6 months before my cough showed up. I sat with that for a very long time. I need you to sit with it too. My wife had been constructing an entire other existence for half a year. And when I handed her the scariest thing I could give her, a possible cancer diagnosis, she didn't panic. She didn't grieve. She made a calculation. She made a calculation about how to speed up her timeline. David found the calculation itself 2 days later. It was buried in an email Patricia had sent from our home computer, the one she thought I never touched, to Adrian Torres on May 10th, 1 week after my biopsy. 1 week. I'm not going to repeat the email to you in her exact words more than once because I can't stand to hear those words come out of my mouth more than that. She wrote that if the test results came back serious, she wasn't interested in spending the next year or 5 years or however many years she had left, propping up a sick old man. She wrote that she could finally start the life she actually wanted. She wrote that I would understand eventually that some things just aren't worth the investment anymore. Not worth the investment. She'd written it in May. She was going to say it out loud to my face in September. And when she did, I was going to be ready. There's one more piece before we get to that dinner, and it matters more than everything else combined. It's the reason I can still believe in loyalty after all of this. It's the reason I haven't become completely cynical about family. While David and Keisha were building the financial picture, I called Marcus, my son. I sat him down at the shop on a Saturday when nobody else was there. I asked him directly if he'd known anything about his mother's plans for the Evanston house. Marcus isn't subtle. I watched the answer move across his face before he even opened his mouth. He knew. He'd known for weeks. He told me almost casually that Mom had said the house would be a good base for everyone once the estate situation settled. He and Stephanie had already chosen a bedroom for children they don't have yet. My own son was house hunting in a property purchased with money stolen from my retirement account, meant for my medical care. He was planning nurseries while his father sat at home wondering why a cancer clinic wouldn't return his calls. He never once asked if I was okay. He never once asked about the cancer results. He asked about the house. Nicole was the exact opposite in every single way. While her brother was picking out paint colors in a home built on my theft, my daughter had quietly taken out a $12,000 loan against her own retirement account to cover the cost of my initial consultation and imaging at University of Minnesota. She did that without knowing what Patricia had done with our accounts. She did that because she was scared and she loved me, and she wasn't going to wait to find out the truth. She never mentioned the money to me once. Keisha found the loan during the forensic review. And when I called Nicole and asked her about it directly when I confronted her with evidence that she'd borrowed from her own future, she just said, "Dad, you would have done the same for me. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." But I did. I made it everything. I want you to know right now before I tell you what happens next, because I think you deserve to know the good part of this story doesn't happen at the very end. It happens right here, quietly, while everything else is breaking apart. My daughter spent her own retirement savings to save my life while my wife spent mine to buy a house for a personal trainer. That contrast is the whole story if you strip away everything else. Our 38th wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday night in late September. Patricia had been planning it for weeks. At the time, I thought that was a good sign. Maybe she was feeling guilty. Maybe something inside her was trying to fix what she'd broken. I know now it was something completely different. She'd scheduled the closing on the Evanston house for the following Wednesday, and I believe, with everything David and I pieced together afterward, that this dinner was supposed to be her clean exit. A public goodbye dressed up as a celebration, timed exactly 4 days before she was supposed to be gone for good with a new house, a new man, and all the money she'd stolen already sitting in accounts I couldn't touch. She invited 16 people, our closest friends from the neighborhood, her sister Claire from Gary, Marcus and Stephanie. Nicole flew in from Minneapolis. I hadn't told her the full story yet. I'd only said that I needed her home for the anniversary, and that it mattered more than she understood. We held the dinner at a restaurant called Vespertine on Milwaukee Avenue, the kind of place with exposed brick and white tablecloths and candles in glass holders, the kind of place that makes an occasion feel significant just by existing. I sat at the head of the table in a charcoal dress shirt that Patricia had picked out for me that morning. I smiled at every single person who came up to congratulate us on 38 years together. The whole time, a file folder from David's office was locked in the glove compartment of my truck outside. Around 8 o'clock, after the entrances had been cleared and the wine had loosened everyone's inhibitions, Patricia stood up to make a toast. I remember thinking how composed she looked, how rehearsed. She talked about 38 years, about growth, about the courage it takes to be honest about what you need, even if it means letting go of things that used to matter. She talked about how people change, how sometimes holding on to the past keeps you from becoming who you're supposed to be. The table nodded along. People smiled. They didn't know they were watching a performance. They didn't know they were watching a woman explain her own infidelity as self-actualization. Then she turned directly to me, glass still raised, and she said the words I will carry for the rest of my life, however long that turns out to be. Tom has always worked so hard for this family, but I think we need to be honest with ourselves that life doesn't wait around, and some people just aren't worth the investment anymore. The table went silent, complete silence. I watched her sister Claire's smile freeze halfway across her face. I watched Marcus stare at his plate. I watched Nicole's face go completely white, because unlike everyone else in that room, my daughter already knew in general terms what her mother had done. 16 people sat in a restaurant and watched my wife humiliate me in public, and not one of them, not her sister, not my son, not a single person, including the man I'd worked with for 15 years, said a single word in my defense. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I didn't do anything because I'd spent 5 weeks preparing for this moment, hoping it wouldn't come, and now that it was here, I was calm in a way I'd never felt before. Before I could even think about what to say, my phone rang. It was sitting face up on the white tablecloth, exactly where I'd placed it when I sat down, and the screen lit up with a name that made every hair on my arm stand up, because I had specifically arranged through David for this exact call to land at this exact time. Dr. James Okonkwo, Northwestern Memorial Cancer Center. And I want to be honest with you. I hadn't arranged this to be theatrical. I had arranged it because Dr. Okonkwo's office had genuinely been trying to reach me urgently for the past week about restarting my treatment timeline, and I'd simply told his scheduling coordinator that Saturday evening around 8 o'clock would be a good time to call because I would be with my family and wanted them to hear directly what was happening. I hadn't lied to anyone. I just made sure the truth arrived at the perfect time. I picked up the phone and put it on speakerphone right there on the white tablecloth in front of 16 people. My sister-in-law, my son, my daughter, and the woman who just told everyone I wasn't worth the investment anymore. Dr. Okonkwo said, "Mr. Hendricks, I'm calling to follow up on the treatment plan we discussed. I know it's a Saturday, but given how much time we've already lost, I wanted to make certain you understood the urgency. We should have started in May, when your pathology first came back. Every single week matters at this stage." The table was completely still. Someone's fork was halfway to their mouth and just stayed there. I said, calm the way David had coached me to be, because a man who stays calm is a man nobody can accuse of overreacting. Dr. Okonkwo, can you clarify something for the people at this table? When you say we've lost time since May, can you explain exactly what happened with my results? There was a pause. Then Dr. Okonkwo, a careful man, who I will be grateful to for as long as I live, said exactly what needed to be said. Of course, Your pathology came back on May 4th, showing stage 2 disease, localized. My office reached out multiple times over the following weeks to schedule your treatment consultation. We were told by someone identifying as your wife that you'd decided to pursue different treatment options and did not wish to be contacted further. We honored that request as required until you called our office directly last month. At that point, we discovered that request had never actually come from you. Patricia's wine glass came down onto the tablecloth so hard it almost cracked. Burgundy wine spread across the white linen like blood. I looked directly at her while I answered him. I said, "Thank you, Dr. Okonkwo. That confirms exactly what I needed confirmed. I'll see you Monday morning for pre-treatment consultation." I hung up. The restaurant around us had gone quiet in that specific way. The way a room goes quiet when everyone realizes they've just watched something they were never supposed to witness. Something real and broken and irreversible. Marcus was the first to speak. And I want you to notice exactly what he said because it tells you everything about who my son had allowed himself to become. He didn't ask if I was going to be okay. He didn't ask about the cancer diagnosis. He looked at his mother and said in a low, panicked voice, "Mom, what is he talking about? What's going on with the house? Not is Dad going to survive? What's going on with the house?" That was the moment I understood completely and finally exactly how deep this had run through my family. How much of the betrayal my own son had known about, had accepted, had profited from. Patricia's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. She looked at me, then at the 16 faces around us, then back at me. She was searching the way people do when they're trying to find a version of this moment that could still be salvaged. There wasn't one. I could see it land in her shoulders. That understanding that there was no explanation, no reframing, no words that could make this better. She said, "Tom, I can explain." "You had 11 weeks, I said. My voice never rose above a normal speaking volume the entire night. "I need you to know that, because power in a moment like this doesn't come from volume. It comes from evidence. You had 11 weeks while I sat at home wondering why a cancer clinic wouldn't call me back. You knew on May 4th. You knew it was real. You knew it was serious. Instead of telling me, you told them I didn't want treatment. You spent that time buying a house with $91,000 out of our retirement account, and a Tesla, and I imagine quite a bit more. Spending with Adrian Torres while I lost 11 weeks, I could have spent fighting a disease that is entirely treatable if you catch it in time. All of this was preventable. All of this was within my reach if you'd just told me the truth. If you'd just let me have the truth." Someone down the table quietly stood up and started gathering their coat. Patricia had both hands over her mouth. I turned to Marcus then because he wasn't getting to sit this one out quietly. "You knew about the house," I said. "You told me yourself 3 weeks ago in the shop. You picked out a bedroom for children you don't have yet, in a house bought with money that was supposed to pay for my cancer treatment. And you never once asked your own father if he was going to be okay. You never once asked what the biopsy showed. You asked about the house." Marcus didn't have an answer. I watched him search for one and come up empty, the same way I probably looked standing in that Minneapolis hospital hallway, holding a phone that had just told me my wife had impersonated me to delay my medical care. I reached into my jacket then and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. The email David had found, the one from May 10th. I didn't read it aloud. I want you to know that. I'm not a cruel man, and I wasn't going to humiliate her the way she tried to humiliate me. Not in front of her sister. Not in front of people who'd come to celebrate something that had already died months before. I just slid it across the white tablecloth toward her. "I think you should read this again," I said quietly. "You wrote it back in May. I believe you'll recognize the phrase about things not being worth the investment anymore. You used it twice. Once in an email to Adrian. Once tonight to my face in front of everyone who came here to celebrate with us." Patricia didn't touch the paper. She just stared at it like it might transform into something else if she looked long enough. "I filed for divorce on Thursday," I said quietly. "David has the paperwork. Given what Keisha found in the financial review, and given the medical record showing you impersonated me to a cancer clinic to delay my treatment, my attorney believes the property settlement is going to look very different than you were expecting. The house in Evanston is being placed under an emergency lien starting Monday morning. That closing on Wednesday isn't going to happen. I stood up from the table. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I mean that sincerely. Please stay. Eat. The dinner's already paid for, and the food here is excellent. This isn't your fault, and I'm not going to let this night ruin a meal that's already on the table. I picked up my jacket, and before I walked out, I looked at my daughter, who was sitting very still with tears running down her face. The kind of tears that come from relief as much as from grief. "Nicole," I said, "walk out with me." We stood on the sidewalk outside Vespertine under the string lights the restaurant keeps up year-round, and I held my daughter while she cried. "You knew something was wrong before anyone else understood," I told her. "You spent your own retirement to get me help when your mother was hiding the truth to build a house with another man. I am never going to forget that. I am never going to let it go unanswered." Over the following month, the picture became clearer piece by piece. Adrian Torres, it turned out, was already engaged quietly to another woman, someone he'd met at a different gym location. Patricia had been by every indication Keisha could find one arrangement among multiple, not even the primary one. The house in Evanston never closed. The lien David filed Monday morning held strong. Under Illinois marital property law, combined with the clear evidence of Patricia's unauthorized withdrawals and medical impersonation, the court ultimately awarded me the majority of the retirement account back. I regained full ownership of Hendrix Industrial Solutions, which had technically always been separate premarital property, though Patricia's attorney initially tried to claim a share. Marcus did not come around easily. He tried twice to call and explain that he'd only known about the house, nothing about the affair or the medical situation. Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. What I knew was that I'd watched him stand in my kitchen a year earlier when I was sick, and I'd watched him choose to ask about a house before he asked about his father's life. I told him gently but firmly that trust isn't something you get to keep just because part of the betrayal wasn't technically your responsibility. He no longer works at Hendrix Industrial Solutions. Robert Castellano does his job now and does it better. I sleep better at night knowing that. But the part of this story, I need you to remember the part that saved my faith in family when everything else had broken it. That's Nicole. That's my daughter. I paid off her retirement loan the week the divorce paperwork was finalized. Every dollar of the $12,000 she spent without telling me, plus interest she never asked for. But that wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. You can't repay loyalty with a check, the same way you settle a debt with a business. I had David restructure my will entirely. Nicole now owns 40% of Hendrix Industrial Solutions, with the option to buy out the remaining share whenever she's ready. I've asked her more than once whether she'd consider moving the corporate job she loves so much into an operations role running a company her father actually built with his hands, instead of just renting her talent out to somewhere in Minneapolis. She hasn't said yes yet, but she hasn't said no either. And every Sunday at 6 o'clock, my phone still rings, without fail. I finished 6 rounds of radiation in December in a treatment room at Northwestern that Dr. Okonkwo personally oversaw. My last scan 3 weeks ago came back clean, no evidence of disease. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second. The way I sat with it in Dr. Okonkwo's office holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than any folder David had ever handed me. No evidence of disease. 11 weeks almost cost me that sentence entirely. I think about Patricia sometimes now, not with rage like I expected I'd still be carrying, but with something closer to tired sadness. I don't know exactly where she is. Claire told me once in an awkward phone call that Patricia's living in an apartment near the mall in Rosemont, alone. That Adrian Torres never called to check on her after that dinner. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want them. Here's what I've learned sitting on my back porch most evenings in Bridgeport with a cup of cold coffee, one lung slightly lighter than it used to be, my daughter's voice on speakerphone from 150 miles away. Loyalty isn't about the big dramatic gestures. It's not about grand sacrifices announced to crowds. It's a $12,000 loan that nobody asked you to take. It's a plant manager noticing you've lost weight before you notice it yourself. It's a doctor in Minneapolis who looked at a scared old man and said, "Mr. Hendrix, this is a fight we win most of the time," and actually meant it. Patricia decided somewhere in May, sitting at a kitchen counter, that I wasn't worth the investment anymore. She was wrong about the investment. She was wrong about almost everything, if I'm honest. But she was most wrong about this. Some people show you exactly what they're worth the moment things get hard. And if you're actually paying attention, really paying attention the way I finally learned to be, you'll notice the ones who were worth everything long before you ever needed proof. I still keep that email David found, folded in my desk drawer. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. Some things aren't worth the investment anymore. She meant it as a verdict on me. I've come to understand it as the truest thing she ever said, just aimed at the wrong person in that room. Because sitting across from me at Vespertine that night, crying real tears while her mother searched for an excuse that didn't exist, was a daughter who'd already proven months before any of us needed the proof exactly what she was worth. And that, more than the house, more than the business, more than the clean scan I carry around now like a second heartbeat, is what I actually walked away from that dinner holding on to. I want to ask you something. If you made it this far with me tonight, I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what time it is where you are. If you've ever been in a room where someone looked right through you the way Patricia looked through me, tell me about it. Tell me whether you'd have handled it the same way or differently. Tell me if you have a daughter like Nicole or a son like Marcus, or if you've been someone's Nicole without them knowing it yet. If this story meant something to you, if it landed somewhere in your chest, hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Share this with someone who needs to know it's never too late to find out exactly who was standing beside you the whole time. Because that's the story we need more of. Not revenge. Not destruction. Just the quiet recognition that some people show up when it matters most, and some people show you who they really are when everything is falling apart. I'll see you on the next one. This is a fictional story, inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Chicago to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.